After what you saw on Saturday against the Georgia Bulldogs, are you still confident that Quinn Ewers, the quarterback for the Texas Longhorns, can lead this team to a national championship? We discuss on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, Quinn Ewers' nightmare performance against the Georgia Bulldogs this past Saturday. In the second segment, Texas SEC championship odds, right? What are their odds to get to the SEC championship game? They've changed significantly since Texas lost to Georgia. It's very tight at the top of the conference right now. And then in the last segment, my Heisman rankings going into the weekend. I don't think I did them last week, but my Heisman rankings going into the weekend. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also, for 2 days in a row, right, I've been wearing a lot of Texas stuff. 2 days in a row, I've had my Rangers hats on, right? Yesterday, the green T hat. Probably didn't even know it was a Rangers hat, but it's fly. And then today, we got the denim Rangers hat on. I got my world championship, Texas Rangers sweater from last year. So World Series starts this Friday, Dodgers and Yankees. I guess I'm just, in the mood for some baseball, right? But Locked On Longhorns, talking about the Texas Longhorns, and we're talking about Quinn Ewers today. And we're going to have a dialogue. And I know Quinn Ewers has meant a lot to this program over the last couple of years. There's people that really love Quinn Ewers and hate to hear anything negative about him. I understand, right? Like I said, he's meant a lot to the resurgence of this Texas program. We're going to have an honest dialogue about what we saw on Saturday and if we're still confident that Quinn Ewers can lead this team to a national championship. And oddly enough, right, like before I started recording this, I had the thought of I feel like Usher right before he recorded Confessions. Like I just feel heavy right now. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know why. I don't know if that's accurate, but I just feel heavy. But that's what I get paid to do. So we're going to do it. And I want to preface my statement, right? Because like I said, the question is, do we still believe, are we confident that Quinn Ewers can lead this team to a national championship? I want to preface my statement, right? Talking about his performance on Saturday, that loss was not all on Quinn Ewers, okay? When you look at the offensive line, Kelvin Banks and Cam Williams, they both lost their matchups to Michael Williams and Jalen Walker. The offensive line certainly could have done a better job of protecting Quinn Ewers and giving him more time, allowing him to settle in, allowing him to be comfortable. When you look at Arch Manning, he was put in the game for 2 drives, and he didn't do anything besides run for 20 yards and fumble the ball as well. Okay, hell of a wake-up call going from playing ULM in Mississippi State to Georgia, but it's not, we should have taken Quinn Ewers out and put Arch Manning in situation because Arch Manning didn't do anything. We gave him his opportunity. The running game didn't do anything. They played Georgia a lot of man coverage, and maybe the receivers could have gotten open a little bit better. So it's not all on Quinn Ewers, okay? But he is the starting quarterback for the Texas Longhorns. When we win, Quinn Ewers gets the majority of the credit. So we have to be able to be honest and assess his performance when we lose. And I understand that there's going to be some people upset. I may lose some subscribers. That is okay. Because like I said, I get paid to do this, and we have to be honest about what we saw and what we have seen at times from Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers was the main reason that the Texas Longhorns lost to the Georgia Bulldogs on Saturday. And when you look at Quinn Ewers, my honest assessment of him is that he is a really good to great college quarterback when everything around him is perfect. When Texas is running the ball, when the offensive line is performing at a very high level, when Sark is dialing it up, when receivers are running wide open across the field, Quinn Ewers is surgical. He is a very good college quarterback. When we have asked Quinn Ewers, maybe outside of the Alabama game, when we have asked him to put the team on his back, when everything is not working around him, we've largely seen the results that we saw this past Saturday, even though that was probably his worst performance that we've seen since his freshman season, right? Kirby Smart came into that game against Quinn Ewers, a third-year quarterback, former number 1 overall player in his class, People talked about Quinn Ewers as if he was a generational talent. And Kirby Smart came into that game and said, we're going to force Quinn Ewers to beat us. And I think that's very telling, right? Because that is when the special quarterbacks shine. And I can understand Quinn Ewers struggling at times against, like a Brent Venables defense, because Brent Venables is going to come in there with all those crazy looks, different formations, moving the safeties around. He's just going to give you so many different looks that, you really haven't seen it and you're adjusting on the fly. But I thought Kirby Smart, for the most part, obviously threw, some different looks in there, but really for the most part, he just played straight man coverage across the board, rushed forward the majority of the time and said, we're going to stop the run and we're going to force Quinn Ewers to beat us. And in year 3, the former number 1 overall player in his class, in that scenario, put on that type of performance. If you went to any special quarterback, right? If you went to any quarterback that we put Quinn Ewers in the same class in and said, yeah, they're just going to play man coverage and they're going to force you to just make tight window throws, but you're going to have opportunities down the field all game. They're going to play a lot of one-on-one on the outside and force you to make tight window throws. Identify the matchup, step up in the pocket and make those throws. Kirby Smart is asking you to beat him. They're going to stop the run. They're basically saying we want the game in Quinn Ewers' hands. That's when the special quarterbacks shine. That's when the elite quarterbacks shine. And we saw the opposite of that from Quinn Ewers. He looked shook. He looked rattled, unprepared. Looked like the moment was way too big for him from the first snap. And to me, that's concerning. Because we talked about year 3, right? Coming back, the 25th start, all of this Quinn Ewers, right? What he meant to this team, experience, yada, yada, yada. And yet, on Saturday, against just simple man coverage, he reverted to the freshman year Quinn Ewers, who at times looked like he had never thrown a football. Like I said, in these type of matchups, and I know he's not an athletic quarterback, and that helps a lot, but in these type of matchups, this is when the special quarterbacks shine, and Quinn Ewers did the opposite. Jalen Milroe obviously has the ability to break things down with his legs as well, but he tore this Georgia defense up passing the ball. True freshman Michael Van Buren from Mississippi State last week tore this Georgia defense up throwing the ball. But Quinn Ewers in year 3 was absolutely shaken, rattled, seeing ghost by this Georgia defense. And so it's fair to question and it's fair to wonder, when the games mean the most, when you need your 5-star quarterback, your 3rd-year quarterback, who's a projected first-round pick, and we talk about like he's the best thing since sliced bread, to step up and be the best player on the field. And rather than that, he was a liability for the Longhorns on Saturday, because we saw a complete lack of awareness in the pocket. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. I wrote this down, but a complete lack of awareness in the pocket, the inability to process what he was seeing, the inability to get off of his first read, staring down receivers, not moving in the pocket, not stepping up, not being mobile. Did not get his feet set, did not marry his feet with his eyes, was not getting under his throws, and had 3 turnovers that ultimately cost the Longhorns in this game. In the Georgia game, what should have been one of your greatest strengths in Quinn Ewers turned out to be your biggest liability. And when we talk about, can Quinn Ewers win a championship for this team? Does he have the it factor? Does he have what it takes to lift this team up when everything's not working around him, when everything's not perfect, when Sark's not dialing up wide open receivers all across the field, when the running backs aren't gashing people for 5-6 yards a carry? Can you go to your 5-star quarterback in Quinn Ewers? Can you go to your year 3 quarterback and say, Quinn, we need you to lift us up today? Quinn, we need you to be the best player on the field. Based on what we saw on Saturday, I'm not sure. Obviously, there's still a lot of football to be played, but I'm not sure. And when you look at some of the guys that have won it recently or come close to winning it, You ask yourself, is Quinn Ewers in the same breath as these guys? Would you take Quinn Ewers over any of these guys? JJ McCarthy, Stetson Bennett, right? I know people laugh at Stetson Bennett, but in these big moments, he shined the brightest. I think Stetson Bennett is more of a playmaker than Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers will probably get drafted before he did. He has more talent than Stetson Bennett did. But in these big games, Stetson Bennett shined the brightest. Mac Jones, Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Tua, Deshaun Watson. Look at some of the guys that got close. CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. When you watch Quinn Ewers, would you put him in that same breath with any of those guys? Would you put him in that same echelon with any of those guys? And if you would, why? Because Quinn Ewers, from what I've seen, is not a force multiplier. Quinn Ewers, from what I've seen, is not making anybody on this team better. He is a really good quarterback in a great system that is supported by everything around him. But when everything around him wasn't working on Saturday and we needed Quinn Ewers to go out there and be one of the best players on the field, he ended up being the worst. And that's just my honest assessment of what I saw from Quinn Ewers on Saturday. Does that mean he won't go out on Saturday, this coming up Saturday, and throw a party against Vanderbilt? I'm sure he will. But you're not going to see Vanderbilt in the playoffs. You're not going to see Vanderbilt in the SEC championship game. You're going to be playing against the big dogs, Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia again, the best teams in the country. And based on what you saw this past Saturday, are you confident that Quinn Ewers can go in there and be one of the best players on the field? I'm not sure about that. And so it's fair to wonder, and a lot of fans have since the game, it is fair to wonder if Quinn Ewers has that it factor that it takes to get to the next level. And it is fair to wonder if Quinn Ewers can lead this team to a national championship. I am in no way saying that we should make the move to Arch Manning. I am in no way saying that Arch Manning is a better quarterback than Quinn Ewers right now. What I am saying is, on that game on Saturday, Kirby Smart went into it and said, I am going to dare Quinn Ewers to beat us. I'm going to give him one-on-one matchups on the outside and dare him to beat us. And we got what we got from Quinn Ewers. And regardless of how you feel about it, regardless of how you feel about what I'm saying, I think that's very telling. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the SEC championship odds for the Texas Longhorns now that they've fallen in conference play to the Georgia Bulldogs. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So that's FanDuel.com. Bet on your favorite team today. All right, so going into the game against Georgia, obviously Texas was undefeated, had not lost. And so it was kind of pretty easy to see the path to, pencil in Texas in the SEC championship game. A lot has changed, right, since they lost to Georgia. And now there are 6 teams, right, 5 teams ahead of Texas. I'm not even sure how the tiebreakers and all of that works, but there are 5 teams ahead of Texas right now. And there are still 2 teams in college football or in the SEC that have not lost a conference game up until this point. And so, Texas losing to Georgia, and obviously, Georgia is a great team. There's not a ton of shame in losing to the University of Georgia, but that has significantly changed their outlook for making the SEC championship game, at least right now. So the landscape at the top of the SEC is Texas A&M and LSU still have not lost a conference game. So that's 1 and 2 right now in the SEC. If the season was over right now, ironically, Texas A&M and LSU would play each other in the SEC championship game. And then you have 4 one-loss teams in the conference, which is Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, and then Texas. Okay. And so when you look at Texas's path, like I said, it's a lot murkier now than it was before the Georgia game, because now you have 6 teams essentially right now fighting for 2 spots. Okay. Texas absolutely cannot afford to lose another game. I think that there are going to be 2 teams in the SEC championship game this year with 1 conference loss. And based on what we saw on Saturday, and Carson Beck didn't, play probably one of the worst games of his career, and Georgia was still able to beat a very good Texas Longhorns team. I think there's a lot of teams fighting for 1 spot, right? Because I think Georgia just finds a way to get into the SEC championship once again. Texas plays Vanderbilt, Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, and A&M on their SEC schedule to close out the year. Now, when I look at Vanderbilt, they're ranked right now 25th team in the country. We'll talk about them, more throughout the week. Texas absolutely cannot afford to lose that game. I'm sorry. As good as Vanderbilt has looked, they beat Kentucky, they beat Alabama. Texas cannot afford to lose that game, even on the road at Vandy. Florida, Arkansas, that's going to be a tough rivalry game. Kentucky, anything could happen in the SEC, I suppose. Texas cannot afford to lose any of those games. Now, A&M at Kyle Field, renewal of a rivalry, the Lone Star Showdown. It's going to be a crazy environment. Anything can happen for sure, but Texas cannot afford to lose that game, especially right now while A&M does not have a conference loss and they're at the top of the SEC. Georgia already, because they beat you, they have the tiebreaker over you, right? So if Georgia does not lose another SEC game, that is a spot that Texas cannot get because Georgia beat Texas head to head, right? And then when you look at Georgia, they have Florida, Ole Miss, who's already lost twice, and then Tennessee to close out their SEC schedule. I really do not see Georgia losing another game. I mean, they're not going to lose to Florida. I mean, come on now. Ole Miss could be a viable test. That game is on the road for Georgia. But like I said, Ole Miss has already lost 2 games. And Lane Kiffin, every time you start to give him his flowers, every time you think he's going to punch up, every time you think he's going to take that next step, he takes a step backwards. I don't see them beating this Georgia defense. And then Tennessee, what we've seen from Nico Yamaleva, I mean, just turning the ball over, has not looked like he did in non-conference play. I think that Georgia defense eats him alive, right? So I don't think Georgia loses again. I think they find a way to get into the SEC championship. The winner of Texas A&M and LSU, one of them has to knock the other off, right? Will have the advantage over you because they still will have 0 conference losses. And when you look at it, A&M has South Carolina, Auburn, and then Texas after LSU. If they can beat LSU at home, they're probably, because of South Carolina and Auburn, I mean, tough games, you know what I mean? But games they should win. They probably go into that Texas game with 0 conference losses. Okay. And so then the winner of that game likely decides who ends up in the SEC championship game to play Georgia. When you look at LSU after they play A&M, if they can beat A&M, they still have Bama, Florida, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma, right? So I still see LSU probably ending up with 2 losses in conference, and I think they're going to lose to A&M. When you look at Tennessee right now, they have Kentucky, Mississippi State, Georgia, and Vandy. They should be able to get by Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt, but I think they lose to Georgia, but possibly one of those spots, right? If they do beat Georgia, one spot in the SEC championship game, it looks like it's going to either go to Tennessee or Georgia, right? And I think it's going to be Georgia who beats Tennessee. And then Missouri, I mean, they're kind of just still hanging on, like flukes, you know what I mean? But they found a way to beat Auburn, so they're still here. They have Alabama, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. So I think what the most likely scenario is that LSU loses multiple times in conference, right? Missouri loses again in conference. Tennessee loses to Georgia, which would give them 2 conference losses. I think A&M beats LSU. And then that Texas game against A&M will decide who plays Georgia in the SEC championship game. But nonetheless, if we're talking about what we can do and how we can control our own destiny, we cannot lose another game. And we now have to, it is a must win. We have to beat A&M at A&M to possibly, right, depending on what happens between Texas A&M and LSU or what Missouri does, to possibly secure a spot in the SEC championship. So what looked like a lot going into the Georgia game, very murky right now. I still think Texas finds a way to get there and hopefully gets a rematch against Georgia, but you have to take care of business. And obviously you have to win the last 5 games on your schedule, including A&M once again, which is a must win. All right, quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into my Heisman candidates going into Heisman rankings, I should say, going into whatever week of college football this is, week 9, I think, to close out today's episode of Locked On Longhorns. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by Return On You. Hey, Longhorn fans, it's time to recognize the Return On You Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pulled over $20,000 to support players on Return On You. Micro deposits lead to massive change with the Roy app. Return On You, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player you choose. Unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going. And you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. The best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. This week, I'm supporting Barron Sorrell. Right? When you look at what Barron Sorrell was able to do, obviously we lost to Georgia, but he was all over the field, in the backfield, just making huge plays. So if you want to support anybody on the Texas Longhorns football team, I say it's Barron Sorrell for what he was able to do in that Georgia game. Certainly did everything he could for Texas to get the win. Let's show Barron Sorrell some love and keep him connected to our school. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Return On You. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, enter referral code Locked On, and you're entered. Already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Download Roy, Return On You now, and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Roy_Return On You for more info. Roy, support the players. Change the game. All right, getting into my Heisman rankings. I got to pull out my handy dandy legal pad again. Getting into the Heisman rankings, going into, I guess, let's see, Texas has played 7 games. We had a bye. There was week 0. So, I mean, 7 games by week 0. So, it would be week 8. I don't know. Do we really care? I guess I don't know. I think it's week 8 of college football. Also, I just want to say this has been like a really weird year for the Heisman. Like, I feel like I'm scraping together Heisman candidates every week. Like, there's not 5 guys like that have made a name for themselves, but everybody's losing. Everybody's throwing picks. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, scraping these together. Number 5, Dylan Sampson for Tennessee. They just had a big win against Alabama. He was a huge part of that, scoring some touchdowns. 926 total yards and 17 touchdowns on the season. They did have the bad loss to Arkansas, but outside of that, Tennessee has been unblemished. One of the top dogs in the SEC right now. So I got Dylan Sampson, running back, number 5. Once again, 926 total yards, 17 touchdowns. He's balling. Travis Hunter at number 4. He's dealt with the injury, left early against Arizona. They were also spanking Arizona. You know what I mean? So they didn't really need him. And then dealt with that shoulder injury. So the stats really haven't been great the last couple of weeks, which will, ultimately affect him. But still, 604 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns, and 3 turnovers forced on the defense. Just doing something we've rarely seen ever in college football and certainly haven't seen for a long time. So he's got to be in your Heisman rankings somewhere. Like, just because, once again, he's doing something we really haven't seen. Dillon Gabriel, number 3 at Oregon, right? The big win against Ohio State, and then they beat Purdue 35-0. Oregon is rolling right now, number 1 team in the country. Dillon Gabriel, 2,172 total yards and 19 touchdowns, 77% completion percentage, right? Picking up where Bo Nix left off in that offense. But Dillon Gabriel looks a little bit better than Bo Nix did in that offense, doing really good. Once again, quarterback for the number 1 team in the country. Ashton Jeanty, number 2, my boy, right? I got him at number 2. He was at number 1. I pushed him back to number 2 coming off a bye week, right? Lost his job on his day off, I guess. 1,277 total yards and 18 touchdowns, averaging 9.9 yards per carry, right? He needs to be up there in New York. It's a travesty. I don't care if he's on a group of 5 team or not. He's one of the best players in college football, period. And then number 1, it's just a magician, right? He's been making magic all season. Down 25, it doesn't matter. Close game against Louisville, doesn't matter. Down 2 touchdowns against Virginia Tech, it doesn't matter. Cam Ward, all right, 2,728 total yards and 27 touchdowns. Number 1 in the nation in QBR, 92.3. They play Florida State this week, who is 1-6. I really don't see an opportunity for Cam Ward to lose the Heisman. I really don't even see an opportunity for Miami to lose a regular season game, right? I mean, Cam Ward's just got it. But every time you watch him, he just makes magic. That is a special brother right there, right? Force multiplier. I was talking about that earlier. Dillon Gabriel, Cam Ward, force multiplier, right? They lift up everybody around them. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Vandy coverage in the next episode, because we all need more Vandy coverage, right? Hook 'em. Peace. If I can find the damn video. Here we go. Peace.